The runway reeked of fuel and fear. It was late afternoon over Normandy, 1944, and the airfield trembled every few seconds from distant artillery fire. The sky was gray, streaked with black smoke. Ground crews stood silently, watching a lone silhouette limping back from the front. A battered P-47 Thunderbolt, trailing a ribbon of smoke that stretched for miles. Its right wing looked chewed apart, as if something had taken a bite out of the metal. The radio crackled with the pilot's strained voice. "She's breaking up. Gears jammed. Clear the strip." His tone shook, the sound of a man wrestling both the controls and the clock. Frank Sparks Donnelly, chief mechanic of the 362nd Fighter Group, didn't move. He just stared at the crippled plane gliding down in a slow, desperate descent. Around him, younger mechanics ducked behind sandbags, bracing for the blast. Sparks didn't flinch. "She'll make it," he muttered. Then the P-47 hit the dirt. The left wheel caught first, snapping off. The right wing scraped the ground, shredding metal and throwing sparks into the air. When the dust settled, the aircraft somehow stood upright. Battered, bleeding oil, but still alive. The pilot climbed out, his legs trembling. "She's finished," he gasped. "You can melt her down for parts," Command agreed. A major walked over, clipboard in hand. "Write her off." Scrap orders signed, but Sparks didn't respond. He crouched beside the ruined wing, running his hand over the twisted aluminum, feeling every bullet hole like a doctor checking for a pulse. Then he looked up at the major and said quietly, "She's not done, till I say she's done." The major frowned. "You're out of your mind, Donnelly." "That bird's finished." Sparks stood, wiping grease from his sleeve. "No, sir. She's just tired. Let her rest. I'll get her flying again." The younger crew chuckled nervously. One whispered, "That wing's shredded, Chief." Sparks didn't look at him. "Aluminum can bend. Steel can mend. Don't ever tell me a bird's dead if the engine still breathes." That night, while others sipped coffee in the mess tent, Sparks stayed beside the wreck, sketching by flashlight on the back of a ration box. He muttered figures to himself. "Angles, weights, tension loads." His assistant asked, "You really think you can fix her?" Sparks smiled. "I don't think, I know, but they'll call me crazy before it's done." He tore a strip of tape from his toolkit, pressed it over a crack in the wing, and whispered like he was speaking to an old friend. "You're gonna fly again, even if it kills me." By sunrise, his decision would break every rule in the Army's maintenance manual. And before the week was out, that reckless repair would turn a crippled P-47 into a legend the Luftwaffe learned to fear. The world remembers the pilots, the leather jackets, the goggles, the grins beside their kill marks. But on every airfield across Europe, in the mud behind the hangars, were the men who made sure those pilots came home alive. Frank Sparks Donnelly was one of them. He wasn't a hero in any newspaper headline. He had no wings on his chest, no medals on his jacket. What he did have were oil-stained hands, sleepless eyes, and a habit of arguing with officers. The mechanics lived in a world that never made the front page. They slept in tents beside the planes, using fuel drums for chairs and toolboxes for pillows. They fixed what bombs broke and what time forgot. When a fighter came in riddled with holes, the pilot climbed out and walked away. But the ground crew stayed, patching, hammering, replacing, improvising. They called themselves the Forgotten Flyers. Sparks had been a machinist in Detroit before the war. He could glance at a bent piece of aluminum and know exactly how to make it straight again. He carried a small hammer he called Lucky, and it never left his belt. When new recruits joined the maintenance line, Sparks gave them one rule: you don't fix planes, you save lives. He'd seen pilots die because a rivet wasn't tight enough or a fuel line wasn't sealed right. Every bolt mattered. Every scratch meant something. "These birds are alive," he used to say. "You treat them like they can feel pain." The mechanics had no glory, but they had purpose. They worked 18-hour days in freezing wind, repairing engines with hands so numb they could barely hold a wrench. Sparks once rebuilt a propeller shaft from parts scavenged off a crashed bomber. When someone asked how, he said, "You don't need the right parts, just the right idea." One night, after a disastrous bombing run, 3 planes came back missing landing gear. Sparks and his crew dragged in old tires, sawed them in half, and built makeshift cradles for the fighters to land on. The pilots survived. Command never found out how. Sparks didn't care. He wasn't chasing praise. He just wanted every man who flew to come back breathing. His crew called him Mad Sparks, half as a joke, half in awe. He didn't follow orders so much as argue with them until they made sense. When told to scrap an aircraft, he'd ask, "Would you scrap a man with a broken leg?" When warned about regulations, he'd mutter, "Regulations don't fly planes." That's why, when Lucky 7 crashed, no one was surprised that Sparks refused to let her die. "That bird took rounds over France and still brought her pilot home," he said. "You don't throw away something that loyal." He ran his hand across the bullet holes like they were scars on a soldier's chest. His assistant, Miller, a 19-year-old kid from Kansas, watched quietly. "You think we can fix her?" he asked. Sparks didn't answer right away. He lit a cigarette, looked at the wreck, and exhaled. "Kid, every plane's got a soul. Ours is just hurt. So yeah, we're gonna fix her, even if it means breaking every damn rule in the book." And with that, the men of the 362nd went back to work. Tired, dirty, underpaid, but bound by something greater than orders. They weren't just repairing machines. They were keeping faith with the sky. The next morning, the P-47 sat in the sun like a wounded animal. Its right wing sagged downward, metal ribs bent at grotesque angles, skin panels shredded and curling upward like torn paper. The hydraulic lines were split. The aileron was gone. To the official maintenance officer, it was simple. Total loss. But to Sparks, it was a puzzle. He walked slow circles around the wreck, cigarette between his teeth, hands folded behind his back. Every few steps, he stopped, crouched, and ran his fingers along the damage, tapping metal like a doctor listens for a heartbeat. The younger mechanic stood back, waiting for his verdict. "She's not dead," he muttered finally. "She's just twisted." One of the boys frowned. "Sir, the main spar is cracked halfway through. There's no way it can hold under torque again." Sparks looked up. "You ever hear of a boxer with a broken rib who still fought 12 rounds? The rib didn't need to be perfect. It just needed to hold long enough." He stood up, tossed his cigarette aside, and began sketching on the dirt with a piece of chalk. Lines, angles, and crude measurements appeared beneath his hands. "We can graft the inner spar from the wrecked D-22 down the line. Use the outer skin from that grounded trainer. Reinforce it with lattice bracing from the old car frame in the motor pool." Miller, his young assistant, blinked. "Car frame? You mean that pre-war Ford?" Sparks nodded. "Yeah, the steel's flexible but light. That lattice pattern can take stress better than the original ribbing." "But sir," Miller protested, "that's not in the manual." Sparks grinned. "Neither is war." By noon, the idea had spread through the camp. Donnelly was building a Frankenstein wing. Officers came by to stare, muttering words like insane, unauthorized, and court-martial. Sparks signered them all. He had a blueprint in his head, and it wouldn't let him sleep. When the supply sergeant refused to issue him parts, Sparks raided the boneyard instead. He and his men stripped 3 wrecked planes under cover of night, carrying panels and struts like thieves. Each piece was hammered, cut, and reshaped by hand. Sparks melted down scrap in a fuel drum, pouring molten metal into makeshift molds. His torch hissed and spat in the dark, throwing red light across his face. Hours turned to days. The men stopped asking if it would work. They just kept following his lead. Sparks barely spoke. He welded with one hand, wiped sweat with the other, muttering numbers and curses in the same breath. He seemed half human, half-possessed. When Miller asked what drove him, Sparks didn't hesitate. Every plane that gets scrapped is one less chance for a pilot to make it home. If I can give one more kid a fighting chance, then rules be damned. By the end of the third night, the new wing was taking shape. It wasn't pretty. The new wing was taking shape. It wasn't pretty. The patchwork looked uneven, rough, and draw. But Sparks didn't care about pretty. He cared about strength. He stepped back, wiped his hands on a rag, and whispered, "You'll fly again, sweetheart." That morning, the first rays of sunlight glinted off the metallic lattice under the patch skin. To the untrained eye, it looked like a mess, but to Sparks, it was a masterpiece born of desperation, ingenuity, and love. In the quiet dawn, he lit another cigarette and smiled faintly. Let's see them call me mad when she takes off. 3 days later, the wing gleamed under the morning sun. A rough, mismatched mosaic of rivets, steel patches, and salvaged paint. It looked like a plane built from spare dreams and stolen time. The officers hated it. The pilots doubted it. But Sparks stood by it like a priest before an altar. The base commander arrived, arms folded, jaw tight. "You understand this is unauthorized," he said. "If that plane comes apart in the air, it's on you." Sparks nodded. "Yes, sir. I'll take the blame." The commander looked at him hard, then shook his head. "You won't be flying it. I'll have it grounded." But he was too late, because while they argued, a figure was already climbing into the cockpit. Lieutenant Mark Connors, the pilot who barely survived the crash, had slipped past the line of gawking mechanics. He buckled in, pulled the canopy shut, and started the engine. The P-47's massive propeller roared to life, scattering dust and paper through the air. Sparks turned, eyes wide. "What the hell is he doing?" Connor's voice crackled over the radio. "If this thing flies, I'm the one who's going to prove it." Before anyone could stop him, the plane rolled forward. Sparks sprinted after it, yelling into his handheld, "Don't you dare take her up, you idiot! She's not tested!" The P-47 thundered down the runway, gathering speed. Mechanics dove out of the way. For a second, it looked like it would stay grounded forever. Then the patched wing caught the wind, flexed once, and the bird rose into the sky. The crowd went silent. Every man stared upward as the plane climbed, engine howling, wobbling slightly. Sparks held his breath. The wing groaned but held steady. Connor's voice came through the radio again. "She's flying! God help me! She's flying!" From the ground, it was a miracle. The Frankenstein plane circled once, twice, its patched wing shimmering in the sunlight. Then Connors did something insane. He dove straight down. The altimeter spun like a roulette wheel. Sparks yelled into the mic, "Pull up, you maniac!" At a last second, Connors yanked the stick. The P-47 screamed over the field, no more than 20 FFE above the ground. The repaired wing flexed, shuddered, but it didn't break. The man below erupted in cheers. Sparks fell to his knees, exhausted. The commander stared in disbelief. "You realize you just broke every regulation in the book?" he said. Sparks looked up, smiling faintly. "Yeah, but I fixed a plane no one else could." When Connors landed, the whole crew ran to meet him. He climbed out, still pale, still shaking. He looked at Sparks and said quietly, "You're crazy, old man. But you just saved my life twice." Sparks didn't answer. He reached out, ran his hand along the patched wing, and whispered, "Told you she wasn't done." That night, as the camp celebrated, Sparks sat alone by the plane. The floodlights reflected off the rough metal, turning it silver against the dark. He took a deep breath and murmured to himself, "The Army builds planes by the book. I build them by heart." He didn't know yet that this illegal repair would travel through rumor and radio all the way to command, and that soon the very wing design they had mocked would be copied, tested and quietly approved across Europe. In war, the numbers always told the story. Bullets fired, planes built, bombs dropped. But in Sparks Donnie's world, the math was different. It wasn't about quantity, It was about the impossible equation between survival and invention. One mechanic, one wrecked plane, one broken rule that changed everything. After the test flight, word of the Frankenstein P-47 spread like wildfire. Ground crews across nearby airfields began asking for details. How did he brace the spar? What materials did he use? Was it true he used a car frame from a Ford pickup? The Army Air Force sent an inspection team within days. They expected chaos. Instead, they found precision. Sparks's blueprint etched onto the back of a mess hall menu, complete with stress calculations and reinforcement ratios. When one officer questioned his numbers, Sparks pointed at the repaired wing and said, "There's your math." Behind his rough humor, though, Sparks kept his own private tally. Every P-47 that returned with holes patched in the field, every pilot who limped home instead of burning in a field. Those were his statistics. The 360-second survival rate had quietly climbed 20% since the mad mechanic began breaking rules. Miller, his assistant, started keeping a notebook of Sparks fixes. He called it the Gospel of Donnelly. There were entries like spliced radiator tubing using a thermos handle and landing gear secured with fence wire held through 2 missions. It sounded insane, but it worked. When questioned by headquarters about his methods, Sparks answered with numbers that shut them up. "You lose 6 aircraft a week on average," he told them. "We haven't lost one in 2 months." Still, Command wasn't convinced. Regulations existed for a reason, they said. Sparks' designs hadn't been stress-tested in laboratories. They were dangerous, Sparks shrugged. So's war. One night, Miller found him sitting under the wing again, staring at it in silence. "You ever think they'll thank you for this?" the young man asked. Sparks chuckled without humor. "Kid, the Army doesn't thank mechanics. They just count what still flies." Then his tone softened. "But you know what? That's enough. Every time a P-47 rolls out and takes off, that's a man going home to his girl. That's the math I care about." It wasn't long before other bases started copying his methods. Mechanics began using his lattice technique to reinforce battle-damaged planes. Informal manuals circulated from England to Italy, handwritten and oil-stained, with one note always scribbled in the margin. Courtesy of Sparks Donnelly, 162nd Fighter Group, the Mad Mechanic. He became a legend nobody officially acknowledged. Engineers at Wright Field secretly reviewed his repairs. One report even concluded, "The field modifications of Sergeant Donnelly demonstrate exceptional structural intuition. Recommend controlled replication." Sparks never saw that report. He didn't need to. He had his proof in the sky, in planes that came back home, scarred but to live. And when someone once asked him how he kept faith through so much death, he answered simply, "Because every nut, every bolt, every patch means one less widow." The math of madness wasn't about defying orders. It was about turning chaos into order, turning broken machines into second chances. Sparks' fixes weren't miracles. They were equations written in sweat, steel, and heart. As Miller would later write in his diary, he never built planes. He built hope, one illegal repair at a time. 2 weeks after the Frankenstein repair, the call came in. Luftwaffekolumns were massing near Kong. The 362nd Fighter Group was ordered to provide air cover. Among the roster of planes ready for takeoff was the patched-up P-47. Now fully cleared for combat under an unspoken agreement, no one would admit it existed. Lieutenant Connors, back at the controls, ran his hand across the patchwork metal before climbing in. "If she breaks apart," he told Sparks. "I'm haunting you." Sparks smirked. "She'll outfly your fear, kid. Trust her." At 900 hours, the Thunderbolts lifted off, engines roaring like thunder rolling across Normandy. The radio chatter filled the air, call signs, bearings, targets. But as soon as they crossed the channel, German radar picked them up. Messorm climbed to intercept. Connor's voice came through, steady. "Bandits 11 Sud high. Looks like 6 of them." The fight began fast. German cannons flashed from above. Streaks of tracer fire slashing through the clouds. Connors rolled into a dive, the patched wing groaning under the pressure. Sparks had reinforced it for that. But this was its first real test. At 400 mph, the wind screamed, trying to tear the plane apart. The right wing flexed just as designed, the latest catching the stress instead of snapping. Connors pulled hard on the stick, the G-force crushing his chest, and the P-47 came around like a steel hammer. He lined up a Focke-Wulf 190 and squeezed the trigger. 850 caliber guns spat fire. The German plane disintegrated in midair. Connors whooped over the radio. One down, she's holding. Sparks, she's holding. From the ground below, Allied troops looked up and saw the patchwork Thunderbolt carving arcs of smoke across the sky. It looked wrong, mismatched, ugly, unpainted, but it fought like nothing else in the air. The dogfight stretched for 10 minutes, an eternity in combat. Connors dove again, shaking 2 more pursuers off his tail. A shell grazed his right wingtip. Sparks flew, metal peeled, but the structure held. Sparks's mad design worked. "Damn thing flies like it wants to live," Connors shouted. When the last Messerschmitt broke off, low on ammo, Connors circled once, surveying the sky littered with smoke and debris. "Area clear," he said, breathing hard. "Request permission to return to base." Back at the airfield, the crew waited, shielding their eyes against the glare. When the patched plane appeared on the horizon, limping but intact, Sparks exhaled a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. Connors taxied to Astop, climbed out, and waved the crew over. "You crazy bastard!" he yelled. "That wing didn't just hold, it saved me twice." Sparks grinned, slapping the wing affectionately. "Told you she had fight left in her." When command heard about it, they didn't send a commendation. They sent an investigator. But the truth was already bigger than any report. Other pilots wanted their plane's sparks fixed. His patchwork lattice became the new field standard for emergency repairs. From Normandy to Naples, word spread. The mad mechanic from Detroit had outsmarted the war. That night, Sparks stood by the runway watching the sunset glow off the plane's battered wing. "You see that?" he whispered to Miller. "That's what they call ugly in the papers, but up there, that's beauty." He was right. Sometimes the ugliest repairs built the strongest machines, and sometimes madness was just genius that refused to wait for permission. By mid-August 1944, the battlefront stretched deep into France, and with it came a new kind of chaos, one that no manual could control. Mechanics like Sparks were forced to work miracles with no sleep, no parts, and no permission. Every field became an airstrip. Every wreck became a donor. The war had turned into a math problem written in exhaustion and blood. How many planes could you lose before morale collapsed? Sparks saw the numbers firsthand. Of the 362nd 48 Thunderbolts, only 23 remained flight-ready. The rest sat in rows, crippled by shrapnel, torn wings, or burnt engines. Replacement parts were days away when they arrived at all. Yet missions went on. "You can't ground courage," Sparks muttered. "You can only patch it." He began leading repair crews through the night, cannibalizing broken planes to rebuild others. 3 engines became 1. 4 wrecks made 2 flyable frames. Sparks called it airborne math. Headquarters called it improvisation bordering on mutiny. But the results were undeniable. By the end of the week, his men had resurrected 7 more Thunderbolts. 7 new lives for the pilots who thought their luck had run out. Miller wrote home, "We don't fix planes anymore. We resurrect them." Every evening, Sparks took inventory like a priest counting souls. Each part told a story. Bullet holes patched with coffee can lids. A control stick welded from a crowbar. A rudder hinge made from a bed frame. "They send us rules," he told his crew. "We send them planes that fly." The collapse math wasn't just about materials. It was about belief. As the front pushed east, fuel grew scarce, food was rationed, and nerves frayed. But Sparks's crew didn't quit. They'd seen what his mad wing had survived. Now they trusted his madness more than the manuals. Then one night, an officer arrived from command carrying a clipboard and a scowl. "Sergeant Donnelly, I've been ordered to shut you down. Your modifications violate structural code." Sparks didn't look up from the wing. He was riveting. "That code's for perfect conditions," he said. "You see any of those around here?" The officer hesitated. Behind Sparks, half a dozen P-47s stood ready for takeoff. The same planes that had been scrapped a week before. The sound of engines warming filled the night air like defiance. "You're risking lives," the officer warned. Sparks finally stood and faced him. "No, sir, I'm saving them." "You want to ground us? Go tell the men up there they'll be fighting tomorrow without air cover." The officer left without another word. The next morning, Sparks' illegal fleet launched with full payloads, strafing German supply convoys and blasting armored columns near Argentine. The after-action report called it the most effective single-day operation by a reduced-strength fighter group. Sparks read that report once, then tossed it aside. "Good," he said. "Now, maybe they'll let me work in peace." But deep down, he knew what the numbers really meant. Every rule he broke kept a man alive. Every piece of scrap Hewleted was a heartbeat borrowed from death. That was his math. Mad, beautiful, and true. That night, Miller caught him staring at the glowing horizon, cigarette ember flickering in the dark. "You ever think about what happens when the war ends?" the young man asked. Sparks exhaled slowly. "Yeah," he said. "Maybe they'll call me reckless. Maybe they'll forget my name. But if they remember the planes that came home, that's enough." And in that moment, under the noise of distant bombers, Sparks, Donnelly understood something that generals never would. You can't win a war with rules. You win it with men crazy enough to bend them for the right reasons. August 1944, the 362nd Fighter Group received an urgent order. Destroy the German supply bridge at St. Lo before sunrise. Intelligence claimed the structure was heavily guarded, and Luftwaffe reinforcements were already on the move. The mission window was 2 hours. Half the group's aircraft were grounded, engines barely holding together. But among the operational planes sat one that no one expected to fly again. The same patched P-47 with Sparks' illegal wing design. Lieutenant Connors volunteered to lead the strike. "If this crate can survive my landings, it can survive anything," he joked. Before takeoff, Sparks met him at the tarmac. "Once, that bridge is crawling with flak guns," he warned. "You take one hit in that wing and it's over." Connors grinned, tightening his harness. "Then let's see how much faith you really built into this thing." At 04:30 hours, 6 Thunderbolts lifted, off into the cold dawn, their silhouettes cutting across the first light over the hedge. Sparks and the crew watched from the ground as the roar of the engines faded into distance. Then came silence, the kind only mechanics knew, the silence between hope and loss. Over the target, the Germans were ready. Anti-aircraft guns lit up the sky like fireworks. Shells burst all around, shaking the P-47s as they dove. Connor's voice came through the radio. "Flak heavy bridge in sight. Starting run." He pushed the throttle to full. The patched wing creaked, metal straining under speed and G-force. The ground rushed up. Sparks' lattice bracing took the load just as it was designed to, flexing instead of braking. Connors released the bombs. Instead of braking. Connors released the bombs. They hit dead center. The bridge exploded in a pillar of smoke and fire. The sky filled with debris, wood, stone, and steel flying in all directions. Connors pulled up hard, his plane rattling violently. A burst of flak tore into his right side, shattering the outer panels. Sparks' voice wasn't there, but it didn't matter. His craftsmanship was. The inner spar held. The other planes regrouped, circling back to cover him as Connors limped home. "Over the radio," he said between gasps. "Wing's gone to hell, but she's holding." "Sparks, you crazy son of a gun. She's holding." Back at base, the mechanics lined the runway. When the P-47 appeared over the horizon, its right side was shredded, half the skin gone, internal ribs glowing in the sunlight like the bones of a bird. Yet it flew steady, unwavering. Connors landed hard, the gear barely surviving. The plane skidded to a stop. Silence, then cheers. Sparks ran to the wing, touching it gently. The lattice was twisted, burned, but intact. "You stubborn old bird," he whispered. That day, the St. Lo Bridge was reported destroyed. A key link severed, German armor stranded. Official reports credited exceptional flying skill, but the pilots knew better. They called it Sparks Bridge. Later that night, Connors handed Sparks a piece of the broken wing, a charred fragment of his lattice work. "Souvenir," he said, "proof that madness flies." Sparks took it, smiled faintly, and replied, "Madness built the sky." The next morning, Command finally cabled an official message. No reprimand, no punishment, just 3 words. "Wing design approved." It was the first time the Army acknowledged that a mechanic's illegal fix had saved an entire mission. Sparks read the telegram, tucked it into his shirt pocket, and went back to work, because there were always more wings to mend. By late September, the war had moved deep into occupied France. The 362nd was stretched thin, pilots exhausted, fuel low, and planes battered beyond what any manual could recommend. Sparks' patchwork fixes now dotted the entire squadron, though most of them were still off the books. The Army called them temporary. The men called them miracles. One plane, however, stood apart. Lucky 7, the original test bird, had seen too much. Bullet holes patched 3 times over, engine replaced twice, and the right wing still bearing Sparks' unpainted lattice scars. She was supposed to be retired, cannibalized for parts, but when a critical recon mission demanded an extra fighter for escort, Lieutenant Connors volunteered to take her out one last time. Sparks met him on the tarmac, face hard. "She's tired, Mark. That wing's held longer than any of us expected." Connors gave a half smile. "So am I. Guess we'll see which of us quits first." The mission was simple on paper. Protect the reconnaissance lightning photographing enemy retreats near the Rhine, but simple never survived the sky. At 13,000 FT, a flight of German FW-100 WWIIs appeared from the clouds, attacking fast and head-on. Bandits. 3. They're coming hot. Connors rolled left, the patched wing flexing dangerously. Sparks' modification screamed under the strain, metal groaning like an animal in pain. But the wing held. Tracer Firestreope. Connors turned into the attack, guns blazing. 2 Germans broke formation. The 3rd stayed locked on the recon plane. Connors throttled forward, diving beneath his target, then climbed sharply straight into the enemy's belly. The FW-190 burst apart, a fireball dissolving into smoke. But in that split second, a cannon shell tore through Lucky 7's right wing, ripping a hole straight through Sparks' lattice frame. Connors steadied the stick, teeth clenched. The plane shuddered violently. "Come on, girl," he muttered. "Don't die on me now." The remaining Germans broke off out of ammo. The recon plane escaped untouched. Connors turned toward base, but the controls were stiff. Hydraulic fluid bled across the fuselage. The right aileron hanging loose. Every vibration threatened to tear the wing off completely. Back on the ground, Sparks and the crew tracked him by radio. The signal crackled through static. "Sparks," Connor said weakly. "She's barely holding. I might have to bail?" "Negative," Sparks shouted. "She's got more heart than you think. Keep her level." "Copy that," Connors whispered. The base came into view. 1 mile, then half a mile. The plane dippadance steadied again. Sparks could see her through the binoculars now, trailing smoke, one wing half gone. He ran toward the runway, waving frantically. "Come on, you've got this." Connors lowered the landing gear manually. Sparks' lattice frame, bent and glowing red-hot, was the only thing keeping the wing attached. The P-47 touched down hard, tires screeching, and skidded halfway down the strip before coming to rest in a cloud of dust. Silence. Then the canopy opened. Connors climbed out slowly, face pale but grinning. "Told you!" he gasped. She'd never quit. Sparks reached him, grabbing his shoulder. The two men just stood there, surrounded by the wreckage, not speaking. When the mechanics finally examined the wing, they found something that stunned even Sparks. Despite the blast, the lattice structure hadn't failed. It had bent just enough to absorb the impact, then locked itself back into alignment. The illegal fix had done what the engineers said was impossible. It had saved a plane from breaking apart mid-air. That night, Sparks pinned a piece of the shattered frame above his bunk. "She's gone now," he said softly. "But hell, she earned her name." Lucky 7 never flew again. But her story spread across every airfield in Europe. When the war finally began to wind down in early 1945, Sparks Donnie's madness had become legend. What started as a single illegal repair on a crippled Thunderbolt had spread through every mechanic shop in the European theater. Crews copied his lattice bracing using scrap steel fence wire, even melted down canteens. Nobody waited for official approval anymore. They just built what worked. By VE Day, the Army Air Forces had logged over 8,000 combat sorties on aircraft repaired using Sparks methods. Not one had failed in flight. Not one wing had collapsed. What the brass called reckless improvisation had quietly saved hundreds of airmen's lives. But Sparks never cared about medals or memos. When a reporter later found him in a hangar outside Lyon, Sparks was still in grease-stained overalls, hands black with oil. The journalist asked, "How did it feel to outsmart the engineers?" Sparks laughed. "I didn't outsmart anybody," he said. "I just stopped waiting for approval." He put it plainly. The manuals told us how to build flawless planes. The war taught us how to build ones that could actually fly. After the war, engineers at Wright Field requested his schematics. They labeled his bracing method structural flexibility engineering. It became the cornerstone for future jet aircraft wing design. What started as an unauthorized fix born from desperation turned into an innovation studied in aviation academies for generations. But for Sparks, it was never about fame. It was about men like Lieutenant Connors, who staggered into his workshop with eyes bloodshot from fatigue and asked, "Can you get her in the air again?" Sparks always replied, "Give me a night and a pot of coffee." Years later, at a reunion of the 362nd Fighter Group, someone handed him a framed photo. Connors standing beside Lucky 7, smoke curling in the background. Beneath it, the caption read, "Built by hands that refused to quit." Sparks stayed silent for a long moment. Then he turned to the crowd and said softly, "You know, that's what this whole war was, hands that just wouldn't quit." He looked over at the younger pilots, the ones now flying jets and rockets, and smiled faintly. "They'll probably call me reckless in the history books," he said. "But the truth is, I just believed a plane could be tougher than the men who made it. And those men were damn near unbreakable." Before the gathering ended, Connors lifted his glass and offered a toast. To Sparks, Donnelly, madman, mechanic, miracle worker. The hangar filled with applause. Sparks only shook his head. "Don't toast me," he said. "Toast the ones who flew through the madness." When he passed away in 1973, the Air Force Archives listed his record simply as technical specialist. No medals, no commendations, just a short note at the bottom. Contributed field modifications to P-47 structural integrity under combat conditions. But to the pilots who survived because of him, his name carried weight. They told their sons and their grandsons. There was a man named Sparks who made metal believe in miracles. Today, one of his repaired wings, bent, welded, scarred, yet still intact, hangs in the National Museum of the U.S. Air Force. No plaque, no ceremony. Only a small tag that reads, "Recovered from France, 1944. Modified in field. functioned perfectly, and if you step close enough, you can still see his initials etched into the rivet line. SD, a madman's mark, a soldier's quiet defiance, proof that sometimes the line between scrap and salvation is drawn by one man who refuses to follow the rules.